At the end of the day, the markets are a simple equation we all learned in our Economics 101 class, supply and demand. Behind every crash, including real estate, one or both sides of this equation collapses, causing serious damage to prices. But before you click off this video thinking it's going to be a math or econ lesson, understand this. We know that during this past run-up in price, one side of this equation has been pushed to its limits, inventory, aka supply. Going back 2 years following the pandemic of 2020, the supply of houses in the United States fell to all-time lows. It was inventory that drove a large portion of this bubble, with so many buyers competing for the few houses that were available. Multiple bids going over the ask price became commonplace, and houses went from selling in months to days, then to hours. The market became an auction of sorts, with most consumers forced to place bids over ask without actually knowing how much they would need to bid in order to win the listing. In many markets around the United States, this caused a frenzy of price shifts, with median prices accelerating more than 50% in less than 2 years. Take for example Miami, Florida. In the winter of 2019, the average home here was set you back $370,000. 2 years later, in the summer of 2022, the same house was $580,000, 56% higher. Now, a large part of this push was the inventory collapse. According to Realtor.com, Miami's housing inventory pre-2020 was typically up here with over 20,000 listings. This dipped down all the way to 6,400 in April of 2022. This means inventory dipped 68% in a matter of months, causing massive overbidding to happen all over South Florida. With so little houses to go around and accelerated demand, you got this: record low price drops. In April of 2022, only around 10% of homes listed had to drop prices in order to sell. But now, as rates accelerate up and the housing market grinds to a halt, we're seeing an almost immediate impact on inventory. Since April, Miami inventory has nearly doubled, going from around 6,000 listings to around 11,000 in October. It wouldn't surprise me to see these numbers go back to the pre-2020 levels at the same rate that they came down to the record low. So what does this mean for prices? Well, for that, we turn to Bill McBride, author of the Calculated Risk Substack and one of the most knowledgeable real estate experts in the world, who uses data to explain his predictions. His inventory will tell the tale piece is a long explanation of how supply influences how much the market will dip. This dot graph is the ultimate representation of this. Basically, on the left y-axis we have months of inventory, and on the x-axis on the bottom we have home prices. As you can see throughout history, the higher inventory got, the more severe the downturn in price became. Right now, the Miami market is still technically tight compared to previous years, but we won't really know just how bad things will get from here because we don't know how long this inventory surge will continue. The ultimate question is, are people capable or willing to buy homes with 7% rates and near record high prices? If that becomes the norm in the future, we can expect prices to remain relatively steady in years going forward. But if there's a total freeze in the market and inventory piles up past traditional pre-2020 levels, you can expect another housing crash like we saw in 2008. This question is largely influenced by this guy, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. If Powell is going to turn into Volcker and continue to raise rates to unbelievable levels, well then the housing market will undoubtedly break. Nobody can afford a 15% mortgage on a $500,000 home. But if he eases and plays the moderate, allowing inflation to run rampant, it's very possible that the housing market doesn't get as affected as many of these real estate perma-bears believe. The real issue here is that a lot of people are under the impression that Powell is the next Volcker and that he is indeed not backing down. In fact, during his last press conference, he said something that I believe to be the most important 2 minutes of his career. Take a listen carefully to each word, and then after, I'll explain why we should expect the market to break following these comments.
The statement points to lag times. I'm wondering if you can walk us through how you judge those lag effects, what that timeline looks like over the coming months or even a year, and where you would expect it to show up in different parts of the economy.
Yeah, so the way I would think about that is, it's a commonly, for a long time, thought that monetary policy works with long and variable lags, and that it works first on financial conditions, and then on economic activity, and then perhaps later than that even on inflation. So that's been the thinking for a long time. There was an old literature that made those lags out to be fairly long. There's newer literature that says that they're shorter, and the truth is we don't have a lot of data of inflation of this high in what is now the modern economy. One big difference now is that it used to be that you would raise the federal funds rate, financial conditions would react, and then that would affect economic activity and inflation. Now, financial conditions react well before, in expectation of monetary policy. That's the way it has moved for a quarter of a century is in the direction of financial conditions, then monetary policy, because the markets are thinking what is the central bank going to do, and there are plenty of economists that also think that once financial conditions change, that the effects on the economy are actually faster than they would have been before. We don't know that. I guess the thing I would say is it's highly uncertain, and so from a risk management standpoint, it would be irresponsible not to ignore them, but you want to consider them, but not take them literally. So I think it's a very difficult place to be, but I would tend to want to be in the middle, looking carefully at what's actually happening with the economy, and trying to make good decisions from a risk management standpoint, remembering, of course, that if we were to over-tighten, we could then use our tools strongly to support the economy, whereas if we don't get inflation under control because we don't tighten enough, now we're in a situation where inflation will become entrenched, and the costs, the employment costs in particular, will be much higher potentially. So from a risk management standpoint, we want to be sure that we don't make the mistake of either failing to tighten enough or loosening policy too soon.
So what you just heard from Powell is that it's now 2022 and the markets behave very differently from that Volcker 1970s era. Today, Wall Street reacts to Fed decisions in anticipation of future moves. That means every single word Powell says is under a magnifying glass with an analyst who uses his tone, words, and body language to predict what he's going to do next. This means when the Fed makes a decision, the market has already mostly priced it in. It's the expectation that causes a change in financial conditions. So essentially, Powell is forced to basically admit that he would rather push this thing past the limit and break something than to ease to fix it later, rather than under-tighten and have inflation run out of control. In Fed speak, this is as clear as saying, I'm going to ruin the economy first because with one sentence I can fix it. We saw what the Fed is capable of on the upside during March of 2020. They took one of the worst crashes in history and fixed it in a record-breaking rally just months later. So in summary, Powell is essentially telling us I'd rather break it than fix it, and the real estate market will be no exception. Thank you guys for watching. As always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it.